I strolled into work on that crisp September morning, feeling the familiar hum of fluorescent lights and the low chatter of my colleagues. But as I rounded the corner to my department, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air prickled up my spine. The scene stopped me in my tracks. 10 detectives, their faces grim and tight, swarmed my workplace like a hive. My eyes darted from one officer to the next, confusion and unease creeping up my throat. It wasn't just the sheer number of police. It was the atmosphere, heavy and suffocating like the moment before a storm tears through. And there he was, my co-worker, a man I had worked beside for over 3 years, stood in handcuffs. His face, normally pale and drawn, looked even more disheveled. His hair hung in greasy clumps, and his shirt was rumpled, but even that familiar sloppiness couldn't mask the wild, desperate glint in his eyes. I couldn't help but feel a sickening mixture of disbelief and dread. I approached the nearest detective, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "Excuse me," I said, trying to force a sense of normalcy into the abnormal. I work here. I know him." I gestured weakly in my co-worker's direction. "What's happening?" The detective turned to me, his mouth a grim line. "We're in the middle of an investigation," he said, and even though he was polite, his words carried a dark, unspoken weight. "Can you come with us for a moment? We need to ask you a few questions." It felt as though I were moving through a fog as they ushered me into a conference room. I was questioned repeatedly, my stomach tightening with each inquiry. What did I know about him? Did he ever make me uncomfortable? Did I think he was capable of doing something horrifying? My answers felt insufficient, but I spoke honestly. "Yes," I confessed, a tremor in my voice. "He's always given me a strange feeling, like something was just off." I told them how I'd often joke with my husband about how this co-worker was so unsettling that if anything ever happened to me, he'd be the first person I'd suspect. My laugh was hollow as I recounted this, the humor now drained entirely. As the hours dragged on, the police tore apart his workstation, carefully cataloging every item he had touched or owned. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding in my chest like a frantic drum. They went through his belongings, snapped evidence photos, and combed through the pieces of a life I had always assumed was mundane. All the while, I was in and out of meetings, each question more uncomfortable than the last. I repeated my impressions of him, painted the picture of someone who had seemed odd but, until today, harmless enough. The details emerged slowly, agonizingly, like a dark tide swallowing the shore. One of the lead detectives informed me that a search warrant had been served at my co-worker's home. He shared that they were uncovering evidence far more horrifying than they had anticipated. He paused, glanced away, and wouldn't meet my eyes. That unsettled me. Men like him, used to dealing with humanity's darkest corners, didn't usually flinch. A sense of dread curled through my veins when he asked for my name and my husband's name. "For confirmation," he said, and though he brushed it off, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. I stepped away to call my husband, my voice hushed and shaky, recounting the bizarre and terrifying events unfolding before me. But what came next was something no one could have prepared me for. The detective returned for one final conversation. He looked exhausted, dark circles etched beneath his eyes. But it wasn't just fatigue. He looked haunted. He wouldn't meet my gaze as he spoke, as though he couldn't bear the weight of the words. He struggled to find a way to soften the blow, but there was no softening this horror. "He's been writing about you," the detective began, voice thick with barely contained emotion. My stomach clenched so violently I nearly doubled over. "For at least a year," he continued. "He kept journals." He swallowed hard, and for a moment he looked away. "These journals detail a fixation on you. An obsession." I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. My pulse roared in my ears, and I barely managed to breathe. I couldn't form words. My mind raced, desperate to deny this reality, but the detective pressed on, his eyes glistening. "He wrote about wanting to be with you," he said quietly, his voice almost breaking. "But there was a problem. Your husband." The way he said it, with a gravity that seemed to suck the air from the room, made my heart stop. "He had planned everything," the detective went on. "Step by step, how he would set your husband up. He wanted to frame him, to convince you that your husband was unfaithful, and once your marriage was destroyed." I couldn't breathe. Tears streamed down my face as the detective continued, his voice cracking. "The end result was your death. He planned to kill you." He paused, his own eyes filling with tears. "But everything in between, the things he wrote, I've never read anything so vile. So grotesque." He wiped at his face, a man who had seen everything, now crying before me. "I don't want to scare you," he whispered, "but please, please make sure you're safe." A detective, crying. The world felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My hands were trembling so violently that I struggled to hold my phone as I updated my husband. We took every precaution, locked every door, looked over our shoulders at every step. I couldn't sleep for nights, the journal's dark fantasies echoing in my mind. My coworker had wanted to ruin my life, take it, even. He was charged, thank God. He's now looking at a long, long time behind bars. But I'm still haunted, kept awake by the thought that he was right there, next to me for years. It's a grim, unforgettable reminder. You never really know anyone. Not even the people you see every day. The graveyard shift at the liquor store has always had an edge to it. A quiet, humming tension that makes the shadows seem thicker, the silence heavier. The hum of the neon open sign buzzes in my ears, and the security camera feed flickers in black and white, catching glimpses of passing cars or the occasional lost stray dog. After sundown, the world outside feels like a different planet, and the people who stumble into my little fluorescent bubble are strange travelers from that distant world. It was around midnight when the first almond chocolate seekers appeared. A wiry man with deep-set eyes and a fraying jacket shuffled through the automatic doors, the bell overhead chiming its dull greeting. He approached the counter, eyes darting left and right, and leaned in closer than I would have liked. "You got almond chocolate?" he whispered, as if the request itself was a secret. "Yeah," I replied, handing over a few bars. He barely nodded, threw a couple crumpled bills on the counter, and slinked back into the shadows. I thought nothing of it at first, but then the pattern began to emerge. Night after night, different people, all jittery with wild eyes and twitchy hands, came in asking for almond chocolate. Nothing else. They didn't browse, didn't make small talk. Just in and out, like a nervous procession. After about a week, the requests became too frequent to ignore. "We should stock more almond chocolate," I told my manager one afternoon. I rubbed my tired eyes, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My manager squinted at me, looking as puzzled as I felt. "Almond chocolate? Really? We hardly sell any during the day," he said. His confusion gnawed at me, but I shrugged it off, assuming it was just some odd coincidence. Night shifts attract all kinds of strange behavior. Then came that night, the night that still makes my skin crawl. It was a little after 1 a.m. when the doors slid open. A man stood there, his silhouette caught in the neon glow from the sign. He was tall, painfully thin, and had greasy, shoulder-length hair. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with shadows that made him look skeletal. He moved like a puppet on strings, jerky and desperate, and made a beeline straight for the counter. "You got almond chocolate?" His voice trembled, and I could almost hear the anxiety vibrating off of him. I hesitated. No, we're out. Sorry." It was like I'd just stabbed him. His face crumpled, and a tear slid down his cheek. His mouth twisted into something between a sob and a scream, and suddenly he was crying. I froze, hands gripping the edge of the counter. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. "I need," he stammered, glancing around wildly. "I need aluminum foil. Now. Do you have foil?" His voice rose in pitch, and I felt my heart begin to race. "No, man," I replied, trying to sound firm despite the quaver in my voice. "You need to leave." He didn't move at first, just kept scanning the aisles, fingers twitching. The guy was unraveling right in front of me, and I had no idea what he might do next. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and stumbled out into the darkness, his sobs echoing in the parking lot. I sank into the swivel chair behind the counter, hands still shaking. What the hell just happened? I muttered to no one. I needed to understand. I pulled out my phone, curiosity and fear spurring me on. My fingers tapped out a search, aluminum foil almond chocolate drug use. The results made my stomach turn. Turns out, aluminum foil is a common tool for using drugs, specifically for smoking certain substances. The almond chocolate wasn't just a snack. No, the foil packaging was crucial for preserving whatever drug they were using, wrapping it up to keep it from spoiling or getting stale. My eyes widened as I read through forums and articles, realizing that I'd been inadvertently fueling a secret ritual, one that had little to do with the candy itself. A cold dread settled over me. I'd been feeding something sinister, something I'd never noticed lurking just beneath the surface of these midnight transactions. What scared me more than anything was how easily I'd dismissed it, how I hadn't even noticed the signs. The twitching hands, the jittery eyes, none of it had registered until it was too late. Just as I processed this, the automatic doors slid open again. My pulse spiked, but this time it was a young woman, clean-cut, tired-looking, just wanting a bottle of wine. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and managed to smile as I rang up her purchase. But the unease didn't leave me. Every time the doors opened after that, I braced myself, half expecting to see that skeletal man or another like him, wild-eyed and desperate. I realized that the night shift wasn't just a quiet lull of hours passing in slow motion. It was a time when shadows grew teeth, and people came looking for things that felt more like rituals than snacks. The rest of my shift crawled by, each minute feeling heavier than the last. I found myself glancing at the display of chocolate bars, the shiny foil catching the fluorescent light. It was unsettling how something so innocuous could be a tool, a prop in a hidden world I barely understood. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray over the horizon, I locked up and walked to my car, feeling the weight of the night still pressing on my shoulders. I kept thinking of that man's tears, the desperation in his voice, and the way a simple request for almond chocolate had become a window into something much darker. That night still clings to me. Now, every time I see a candy bar wrapped in foil, a shiver runs down my spine. What else had I been missing in the quiet hours, when the world was more shadow than light? I guess that's what the night shift does. It peels back the ordinary, revealing just how much darkness hides beneath the surface. The summer of 2021 was supposed to be a season of long overdue escape. After a year of being cooped up, my family and I were finally breaking free, setting off for a vacation we'd planned and dreamed about for months. The destination? Lake Tahoe, a gem of deep blue nestled high in the Sierra Nevada. A place so breathtaking it felt like stepping into a painting. Our excitement was contagious, a buzz of anticipation that pulsed through the cramped car as we made our way from Western California to the northern shores of the lake. Everything was perfect. Almost. My father couldn't make it on time, work obligations keeping him tethered to the real world while the rest of us plunged into vacation mode. He'd join us later, he promised, and in the meantime, we were determined to make the most of the pristine wilderness that surrounded us. Our first full day was sun-drenched and blissful. We splashed in the lake, the Nevada side of the North Shore, looking like something out of a dream, with water so clear you could see straight to the sandy bottom. But the lake had an eerie stillness to it, a vastness that felt almost sentient. When the afternoon light grew golden, we returned to our snug little Airbnb cabin, our laughter and sunburned smiles belying the unease I felt lurking somewhere deep in the pit of my stomach. The following day, we went back to the same beach. My uncle, ever the adventurer, led us to a secluded cove he had discovered, a place only accessible by water. With paddleboards in tow, he guided us to a cluster of rocks perfect for cliff jumping. The thrill of it was undeniable, hauling ourselves up the jagged surfaces, feeling the pulse of adrenaline before we hurled ourselves into the cold embrace of the lake. One rock stood out from the rest, a behemoth of granite, sitting farther out in the lake, brooding and ominous. It was too distant, too imposing for any of us to dare. We joked about conquering it one day, but left it untouched, a silent challenge etched into our minds. That afternoon, my father finally arrived. We greeted him with stories of our cliff-jumping escapades, and he lit up with excitement. Adventure ran in his blood, and he was eager to experience it himself. Everyone else was exhausted from the morning's exploits, so it ended up being just the two of us, father and son, braving the lake together. We didn't have a paddleboard, so we'd have to swim. The water felt colder in the late afternoon, the sun beginning its descent, casting long shadows over the mountains. But my dad, ever the thrill-seeker, was undeterred. We swam from rock to rock, climbing, leaping, laughing, each jump a shared moment of exhilaration. Then he suggested the big rock. My heart lurched, but I didn't want to seem afraid. I tried to shake off the unease that made my gut feel tight. "Sure," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. We started swimming toward it, but the distance was deceptive. The water seemed to stretch out endlessly, every stroke more tiring than the last. I'd always been a strong swimmer, but something about that swim felt wrong. The water wasn't just cold, it was heavy, dragging at me like an unseen hand. When we reached the rock, the climb was brutal. The granite was rough, cutting into our palms, and the air up there felt thinner, more brittle. My dad hoisted me up, and we stood together, surveying the vast expanse of blue that surrounded us. The lake felt alive, its surface rippling like it was breathing. My dad smiled, but there was a nervous edge to it. Without hesitating, he jumped first. I watched him fall, the wind carrying his shout until he slammed into the water with a loud, echoing smack. Then silence. An awful, stretching silence that made my pulse race. Seconds ticked by, and he didn't come up. My stomach twisted, and I leaned forward, my breath stuck in my throat. Finally, he emerged gasping, his face pale as death. Something was wrong. I could see it in his wide, haunted eyes. "Dad!" I shouted, panic making my voice crack. "Are you okay?" He looked up at me, his face strained, trying to force a smile that never reached his eyes. "Yeah," he croaked, laughing weakly. "Big jump, huh?" But his laugh was hollow, trembling. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He told me to jump too, his voice tight, urgent. My knees felt like lead, but I couldn't back out. I took a deep breath and jumped. The drop was shorter than it felt, but when I hit the water, a bone-deep chill enveloped me. Something about the lake felt off, like it was pressing in on me, pulling me under. When I broke the surface, my dad was already swimming toward the shore, his movements frantic. "Come on," he shouted, the desperation contagious. We swam back, silence thick between us, my dad pushing me forward with a speed that bordered on panic. We stumbled onto the beach, dripping and exhausted. My dad grabbed my mother and grandparents, pulling them aside. Their conversation was hushed, tense, and I could see the color drain from my mother's face. I sat alone, confusion and dread swirling in my chest. The calm of the lake mocked me, serene and indifferent. Sirens shattered the silence. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees as an ambulance and police cars arrived in the parking lot. I didn't know what had happened, what terrible secret had twisted the afternoon into something sinister. We left Lake Tahoe soon after. The vacation we had dreamed of soured and stained. It wasn't until 2 years later that I learned the truth. My dad finally told me, his voice low and haunted, refusing to meet my eyes. He had seen a body, a bloated, lifeless corpse, drifting in the shadows beneath the rock where we had jumped. He didn't know if it was a drowning victim or something worse. Whatever it was, the image has never left him, an unspoken terror lurking between us. We never returned to Tahoe. The lake still haunts me, a beautiful, otherworldly graveyard that holds its secrets close, deep in its cold, heavy depths. 11 years ago, my family and I called an extended stay hotel our home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was better than living in our car or struggling under the open sky. The room was small, a one-bedroom unit divided into 2 sleeping areas, a kitchenette, and a cramped bathroom. But it was shelter, and that counted for something. The long hallways echoed with the sounds of other families like ours, people in transit or those who had lived there for years, entangled in circumstances they couldn't quite escape. We settled in, making friends with neighbors and even some of the managers. The hotel wasn't exactly a warm, inviting place, but the odd camaraderie made it feel less grim. A few doors down from us lived an older gentleman. He was quiet, always nodding politely when we passed him in the hall. Sometimes his young adult son would visit, a weekly ritual marked by laughter that echoed faintly through the walls. The old man's room, like the others, was an anonymous space filled with whispered stories and secrets. It was an afternoon like any other when my best friend and I returned from a day of shopping and hanging out, bags crinkling in our hands, the sun low and golden. As we pulled into the hotel's wide driveway, something froze me in place. My hands gripped the wheel tighter as a dark figure caught my eye. It stood at the edge of the parking lot, black as midnight and utterly still. It looked like a man, but not quite. The thing was featureless, a shadow given form, its head tilted upward as if studying the building. My breath caught in my throat as we drove past. The figure turned its head to look at us, and even though it had no eyes, I felt it watching me. A deep, marrow-chilling dread unfurled inside my chest. I tore my gaze away, my pulse racing, and whispered to my friend, "I think I just saw death." To my surprise, he didn't laugh it off. Instead, his eyes widened, and he nodded. "I saw it too," he said, his voice low, almost reverent, as he pointed to the exact spot where the figure had been standing. We exchanged a long, uneasy glance, and then fell silent. I muttered a prayer, asking God to protect my family and everyone in the hotel. The air felt charged, and the shadow of that figure clung to my spirit long after we went inside. 2 days later, that sense of unease bloomed into something far darker. It was early morning when a commotion erupted in the hallway. Voices echoed against the thin walls, strained and tense. My parents and I stepped out of our room to see what was happening. Neighbors gathered in small, whispering clusters. The hotel manager stood near the room a few doors down, his face pale and drawn. I approached slowly, my stomach churning. We soon learned the horrible news. The older gentleman who lived there had died the previous day. His son had come to visit, as usual, but when his father didn't answer the door, he knew something was terribly wrong. He'd called the manager, who unlocked the room. What they found inside was a scene no son should ever have to witness. The old man's body was still, lifeless, waiting for someone to notice that he had slipped away. It took hours for the authorities to remove his body, the air thick with sorrow and something else, something I couldn't name but could feel, heavy and suffocating. Neighbors drifted back to their rooms, murmuring condolences, but the weight of what had happened lingered like an unwelcome guest. Later that day, I stepped outside, needing to clear my head. The back stairwell was a place I often went for privacy, a forgotten corner of the building that smelled of stale cigarettes and damp concrete. I pulled out my phone, calling a close friend from another state, hoping to lose myself in the comfort of familiar conversation. That's when I saw him. He was walking slowly down the stairs, just a few feet below me. An older man, his back slightly hunched, dressed in a faded blue button-up shirt. I remember every detail, the worn fabric, the sad set of his shoulders. He must have heard me, because he paused and turned his head to look up. Our eyes met, and the sorrow in his expression was so deep, so ancient, that it took my breath away. But then my shock turned into something colder. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, not at first. Only the top half of him was visible. From the waist down, there was nothing. His legs simply faded into thin air, as if he were a figure half erased from a photograph. He turned back around, taking one more step down the stairs before vanishing completely. My mouth went dry, and I felt every hair on my body stand on end. I stumbled backward, my phone slipping from my hand. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. Logic and reason struggled to catch up, but deep down I knew. I'd seen the old man's spirit, his soul leaving for wherever it is that we go when we're no longer tethered to this world. I don't believe in ghosts, not the way they're portrayed in horror movies. But I do believe we have spirits, something deeper and more eternal. And in that moment, I was a witness to something extraordinary and terrible. The crossing over, the soul unmooring from flesh. I never spoke of it to anyone, not even my family. But I still remember the dark figure in the parking lot and the old man's sad, fading eyes. I think about how I'd seen death before it even arrived, lingering in the shadows, waiting. The hotel was never quite the same after that. For the rest of our stay, I felt a watchful presence in the halls, and each creak of the old building made my heart race. The sky was bruised with the last colors of sunset, streaks of orange and purple melting into the oncoming dusk. Earlier this year, when I was still 14, I found myself walking home from my friend's house, my sneakers scuffing against the cracked pavement. The street I took was busy during the day, full of people and noise, but now it had fallen into that quiet lull that comes just before night sinks in. Still, I wasn't overly anxious. Not at first. The street lamps flickered on, casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves of the old oaks lining the road. My mind drifted, thinking about the dumb jokes my friend and I had laughed about earlier, how carefree we'd been. I almost smiled at the thought, but then I saw him, and the ease in my chest curdled into something tight and uneasy. He appeared out of nowhere, stepping out from the shadow of a low brick wall, a grocery bag swinging from one hand. He was older, a few inches taller than me, with a face that was hard to read in the fading light. My heart stumbled in my chest, and I automatically slowed down, every sense sharpening, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. "Hey," he called out, his voice surprisingly casual, like we were old friends. I stopped, even though every instinct screamed at me to keep walking. There was something about the way he stood there, rooted in place but bristling with an unnatural energy, that made my gut twist. I don't deal well with strangers, I never have, but this was different. This was pure, primal discomfort. "Will you take this bag down to that guy over there?" he asked, lifting the plastic grocery bag a little, the thin handles rustling. He motioned with a nod of his head, but I looked and saw no one. The sidewalk stretched out empty, save for the parked cars and the dark shapes of houses. I swallowed, my mouth dry. "Something's wrong," whispered a voice in my mind, cold and insistent. I couldn't tell if it was the way he stood too still or how his smile never reached his eyes, but I knew I had to get out of there. My words came out jumbled, shaky. "And no, I can't," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I backed up a step, feeling trapped in the amber light of the street lamp. He didn't move. He just watched me, a hint of disappointment curving his mouth down, and that made it so much worse. It was as if he'd expected me to say no, and something about that realization made the back of my neck go cold. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned and walked quickly down the street, resisting the urge to break into a run. I didn't want him to know how scared I was, didn't want to give him any reason to chase me. 20 feet ahead, I saw a white van parked on the curb. My pulse, which had already been racing, spiked even higher. The van looked ordinary enough, but then I saw a man sitting in the driver's seat. He was younger than the first man but still older, probably middle-aged, with the door slightly open and one leg hanging out, like he was about to step onto the street. His gaze met mine and my heart sank. His eyes narrowed, and the air between us thickened with unspoken intent. I didn't know if I was being paranoid, but it didn't matter. My instincts screamed at me, adrenaline roaring in my ears. This was bad, really bad. The kind of bad that makes your stomach cramp and your vision go sharp, every detail burning itself into your brain. The man with the grocery bag, the van, the guy sitting in the driver's seat, poised and waiting. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder. The older man hadn't moved. He just stood there, his eyes following me. The way he stared made my skin crawl, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking straight into some kind of trap. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to walk faster, not wanting to break into a run and draw more attention. My phone was in my pocket, and my fingers fumbled for it, slick with sweat. I pressed it to my ear and dialed the one person I knew could make me feel safe. My grandmother answered on the second ring, her warm, familiar voice breaking through the fog of panic clouding my mind. "Gram," I said, and the fear cracked through my voice. "Can you come pick me up? I don't feel safe." I told her where I was, my voice shaking. She didn't ask questions, just said she'd be there as fast as she could. The street stretched on, feeling impossibly long. My breath was shallow, and I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see the two men closing in. But they didn't move. The man by the van kept his leg half out, still and watchful, while the older man with the bag remained frozen in the same spot, his silhouette eerie and wrong under the street lamp. I couldn't let my guard down, not until my grandmother arrived. I kept walking, heart pounding, every shadow in the fading light a potential threat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her car rounded the corner, headlights washing over me like a beacon. I ran to her, nearly collapsing into the passenger seat, and slammed the door behind me. As she drove us away, I chanced one last look over my shoulder. The man with the grocery bag was still there, standing like a silent sentinel, watching us leave. I never saw him again, but I never forgot his face, or the way that moment changed me. A few years ago, back when my daughter was a giggling toddler, my wife and I had a tradition of taking her to a nearby lake. It was our hidden slice of paradise, a place that seemed immune to the stresses of everyday life, where the only sounds were the wind rustling through the trees and the soft lap of the waves against the shore. We'd laid out our picnic on a faded blanket, our daughter squealing with laughter as she chased bubbles that glinted like tiny rainbows in the sunlight. The day had been blissful, simple, one of those golden memories you wish could stretch on forever. But even perfect days can twist into nightmares. After we finished eating, my wife decided she wanted to go for a quick swim. She smiled as she kissed our daughter's forehead, the same warm, confident smile I'd fallen in love with. "Watch her for me," she called over her shoulder, wading into the water. I nodded, my eyes following her as she moved farther out, the water rising from her knees to her waist, and then up to her shoulders. I turned my attention back to my daughter, who was tugging on my arm, demanding another bubble. I obliged, blowing a few more into the air. Her laughter was infectious, pure joy, and I found myself grinning. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something that made the smile freeze on my face. My wife had stopped moving. She stood there, waist deep in the water, her entire body rigid. Her face, which had been serene only moments ago, was twisted with something that looked like disbelief. Or was it horror? The sun cast shimmering reflections over the lake, distorting everything, making it hard to tell. "Hey!" she called, her voice taut and brittle. I could barely hear her over the gentle ripple of the waves. She shouted again, and this time her voice carried, sharp and splintered. "I think I just stepped on someone's face." Time seemed to slow down, the air thick and heavy, every noise dulled by the thundering of my heartbeat. I didn't move, not at first, because my brain couldn't catch up. Stepped on someone's face? The words didn't make sense. They felt like a sick joke, but the way she was looking at me, pale, stricken, made my stomach twist. She started moving, fast, splashing her way back to shore. Her legs seemed to cut through the water desperately, like she couldn't get out quickly enough. I stumbled to my feet, reaching out to her when she finally broke free of the lake, water streaming off her shivering body. She was visibly shaken, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "I'm not crazy," she said, her voice trembling. I swear I felt it. While I was swimming, my foot brushed against something soft. At first, I thought it was just a rock or some weird clump of seaweed. Her hands were trembling, clutching at my arm like she needed to hold onto something solid. But then I pressed down and I could feel it, a nose, an eye socket. I even felt the hollow of the eye. I swallowed, my mouth dry as sand. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terror I'd never seen in her before. I should have been the strong one, the one to reassure her, but I was frozen. The idea of going into the water to check filled me with a dread, so intense I felt sick. My mind was already conjuring images I didn't want to believe. The shape of a face lying just beneath the surface, eyes wide and staring, mouth locked in a silent scream. "Let's go," I said, my voice cracking. "We need to leave. Now." We packed up in record time, barely speaking, our hands fumbling as we shoved everything into the bag. I kept glancing at the water, half expecting to see someone, break the surface. But the lake remained deceptively peaceful, glittering under the sun, as if it hadn't just become the backdrop for something unspeakably wrong. The car ride home was quiet, heavy with unspoken fears. My wife kept looking over her shoulder, as if she expected something to follow us. Our daughter, blissfully unaware, babbled on about the bubbles, her voice a fragile barrier against the dark thoughts pressing in. The following morning, reality caught up with us in the worst way. The local news anchor's voice droned from the TV, but one sentence cut through the noise and lodged in my brain like a shard of ice. A young boy who had been missing for several days was discovered in the lake, the anchor reported, her voice grave. Authorities believe he drowned. His body was found not far from the popular swimming area. My wife went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. We both knew. The boy had been there the entire time, hidden just beneath the surface. The thing she had felt, the soft shape, the nose, the eye socket, had been him. The laughter of children, the family splashing in the water, our carefree afternoon, all of it had played out above the silent horror lying in wait. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake, the image of the lake replaying in my mind, the water still and calm, hiding a secret it had only half revealed. My wife couldn't stop shaking, and I didn't know how to comfort her. I wasn't even sure I believed in ghosts, but I did believe in the darkness that haunts places, in the way trauma clings to the air, changing it. My best friend, David, was home alone babysitting a friend's kid, Junior. David was only a teenager back then, but looking after a child on his own was nothing new. The kid, around 4 or 5 years old, was bouncing off the walls with energy despite the oppressive warmth. David had long since learned to manage, but that night was different. Something about it felt heavy, like the air was buzzing with static just waiting to spark. David's dad, a courier who worked late nights, had a thing for safety. Or maybe obsession was a better word. He was a paranoid man who believed in keeping a watchful eye over his home, so he'd set up a complex network of security cameras. Every inch of their house and yard was recorded, with screens in the den displaying live footage from every angle. You couldn't take a step outside without a camera catching it. Maybe that's why David always felt like his house had a set of invisible eyes, watching, waiting. That night, Junior was unusually restless. David had been holed up in his bedroom, trying to pass the time while the kid played nearby. But at some point, curiosity, or a vague sense of unease, made David get up and head to the den to check the security feeds. The den door was closed, which wasn't unusual, but when he tried to turn the knob, it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the inside. Before he could even wonder why, Junior opened the door, peeking up at David with wide eyes. "Why did you lock the door?" David asked, frowning. Junior's small hands clutched the knob tightly. His voice was quiet, but the words made the fine hairs on David's arms stand up. "Because of the lady," Junior said, his voice as solemn as a funeral bell. David felt his stomach lurch. "What lady?" he asked, trying to mask the sudden tremor in his voice. Junior's answer was blunt and chilling. "Your mom. I saw her in the kitchen." David's heart stopped, then thudded painfully in his chest. His mom had died just 8 months prior. The grief still hung heavy in the house, in every dusty corner, and every room that still smelled faintly of her perfume. The mention of her hit like a punch to the gut, but he forced himself to keep his face neutral. "You saw my mom?" David asked carefully. He tried to rationalize it. Kids have wild imaginations, he told himself, but Junior's eyes were wide, genuine, and filled with a strange mix of wonder and fear. "Yeah," Junior insisted. She was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. He pointed to the area just beyond the den, where the living room merged seamlessly with the kitchen. From the kitchen's entryway, you could see the door leading to the screened-in sitting area outside, the very same ramp that David's mom used to get to the yard before she passed. David felt a chill creep up his spine. He wasn't superstitious. He didn't believe in ghosts, but something in Junior's certainty unnerved him. Even so, he didn't want to scare the kid, or himself, by buying into the fear. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Let's check it out together." He grabbed a kitchen knife, just in case, and they walked down the hallway, David's pulse drumming in his ears. They stepped into the kitchen. The door to the screened-in sitting area was open, letting in the night air. That wasn't strange, though. The house trapped heat like a sauna, so leaving doors open was normal. Still, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. He stepped outside, knife in hand, and looked left down the ramp. Nothing. Just shadows pooling in the corners of the yard. He turned right, scanning the length of the yard. Still nothing. The night was still, eerily so, the quiet heavy and suffocating. Junior wouldn't calm down. He kept insisting he'd seen David's mom, that she had been right there. Normally, when you reassure a kid and show them there's nothing to be afraid of, they relax. But Junior wouldn't let it go. His little hands were shaking, and his eyes were wild with insistence. Desperate to prove there was nothing there, David came up with an idea. "We have cameras, remember," he said. "Everything's recorded. Let's check the footage and see." Junior nodded, and they went back to the den, David's heart thumping in anticipation. He pulled up the video feed and scanned through the recordings, his eyes locked on the timestamps from when Junior claimed he saw the figure. The footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. No shadows, no ghostly shapes. But then David's blood ran cold. He watched the screen as a figure appeared in the yard. An old woman, her back hunched and her gray hair pulled back into a loose bun. She moved with an unsettling confidence, clutching a cloth grocery bag in her bony hand. David watched, stunned, as she came in from the front, casually opened the backyard gate, and walked up the ramp to the screened sitting area. She paused, standing there for a moment, and then pushed open the kitchen door. David's mouth went dry. She stepped into the house, moving deeper inside. Junior had seen her. The old woman. David's mom. But here was the worst part. As David and Junior entered the kitchen to investigate, she was still there. The footage showed her slipping out the back, her movements smooth and deliberate. She'd taken the long way around the yard, avoiding the direction David had looked. He had missed her by half a second. Half a second. She'd been right there, standing in his kitchen for 10 whole minutes. A heavy, suffocating silence followed. David didn't call the police, even though I would have in a heartbeat. He told me later that he was worried about his dad's reaction, the paranoia his father carried like a second skin. Days passed, then weeks. Finally, they learned the truth. The woman had dementia. She had wandered into their house in a confused state, a tragic accident of lost time and memories. But knowing didn't erase the terror. It didn't change the fact that, for 10 minutes, a stranger had stood in their kitchen, and David had almost come face to face with something that wasn't his mother, but felt just as ghostly. Back then, my life was a blur of exhaustion and routine, the kind of tired that seeps deep into your bones and stays there. My son was just a toddler, and nights were often unpredictable. He has autism, and the nighttime hours were filled with restless movements, sudden wake-ups, and the kind of vigilance that only parents in similar situations know too well. To make things easier, I'd set up a separate bed in his room, sleeping close by in case he needed me. His small toddler bed, with its half guardrail, sat just a few feet away from mine, and I was used to waking up to him giggling or shuffling around on the floor, being the sneaky little adventurer he always was. But this night was different. This night made me question the things I'd always assumed were safe and familiar. It was late, the hour where silence becomes almost tangible, pressing in from every direction. The house was still, heavy with the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like the world was holding its breath. I was drifting in and out of that fragile space between sleep and waking when I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of weight pressing down on the edge of my bed, just by my legs. My heart lurched, and the sleep fog in my mind evaporated in an instant. I turned over, fully expecting to see my son crawling around on the floor. Sure enough, there he was, moving in that playful, sneaky way he always did when he thought he was getting away with something. His little giggles were so familiar, so innocent, and I let out a half-tired sigh. "Get back in bed," I whispered, my voice low and affectionate, as it always was during these nightly escapades. But then, just as the words left my mouth, I heard it, a soft, steady snore. It came from the direction of my son's bed. My stomach twisted, cold dread spreading through my limbs. I turned my head, slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. My son was there, lying in his toddler bed, curled up and deeply asleep. He hadn't moved. His soft breathing continued, undisturbed. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to turn back to the floor, to the spot where I had just seen him. Nothing. The room was empty, the space where he'd been crawling only seconds before now swallowed by shadows. I stared, willing something, anything, to make sense, but there was nothing. Only silence and the creeping sense that something was very, very wrong. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, my body frozen, ears straining for any sound, any hint that I wasn't alone. But all I heard was the wind whispering against the window pane and my son's gentle snores. Eventually, I told myself it had to be exhaustion, a trick of the mind. After all, I was running on so little sleep, constantly teetering on the edge of wakefulness. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe it was stress. I convinced myself of that because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to face. But even then, a part of me knew better. For a while after that, the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed happened frequently. Always the same, the subtle shift of weight, the dip in the mattress, like an invisible presence settling beside me. Each time, I would lie there, every muscle tense, holding my breath and waiting for something, anything, to explain it. But it never did. Eventually, the feeling stopped. Weeks passed, then months, then years. The strange events faded into the back of my mind, a ghost story I tried to forget. Life moved forward. My son grew older, and our routines changed. He still needed me, but his restless nights became less frequent. The weight pressing on my bed became a memory, one that I tried not to dwell on. But then, just recently, it started happening again. The first time it returned, I was half asleep, lulled into the false comfort of routine. My son was breathing softly in his own bed, and the room was wrapped in that familiar nighttime stillness. Then it happened, the mattress shifting under an invisible weight, the unmistakable dip just beside my legs. My eyes snapped open, the same icy dread flooding back as if no time had passed. I stayed as still as possible, my breath shallow, listening to the quiet, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But it felt real. It felt too real. This time, I didn't dare turn over. I didn't try to rationalize it. I simply lay there, my mind spinning with questions and fear. Why had it stopped for years, and then suddenly come back? What was it? Why my bed? And why now, when my son was older, more aware of the world around him, when he no longer giggled on the floor or woke up in the middle of the night like he used to? Sometimes, in the darkest hours, I wonder if it's connected to him somehow. If whatever presence sits at the edge of my bed has been there all along, watching over him, or worse, watching him. Other nights, I try to pretend it's nothing, just a tired mind making shapes out of shadows. The land was wild and forgotten, miles down an overgrown dirt road that snaked deeper and deeper into dense woods. The camp itself was like something out of a fever dream. An old cabin that hadn't seen proper use in years, choked by vines and surrounded by a forest that felt ancient and watchful. The whole property was cut off from the rest of the world, swallowed by trees that seemed to whisper secrets to one another. It was, without a doubt, the most secluded place I'd ever been. When I hunted there alone, an uncanny awareness always crept over me, a sense that I wasn't as alone as I thought I was. Sometimes I'd arrive at the cabin to find the front door wide open, even though I was sure I'd locked it on my last visit. The thick padlock on the gate at the property's entrance was always untouched, but the door swinging open in the dead silence of the woods unnerved me. I'd laugh it off, chalking it up to wind or an old frame shifting with the seasons. But as I learned, the forest held more than just rustling leaves and rotting wood. One evening, I set out for a hunt, rifle in hand and that familiar, stubborn skepticism in my heart. The sun was hanging low in the sky, painting the treetops with gold as I made my way to a small valley by the creek. We'd set up a food plot there, lining the creek that served as the property's natural boundary. It was one of the best spots to catch deer moving in for an evening feed. But as soon as I climbed into the stand, I felt it, a gnawing unease like cold fingers pressing into the back of my neck. It didn't make sense. I'd hunted plenty of times, and I was armed, a .308 loaded with ballistic-tipped rounds that could drop anything in those woods. But sitting there, cradling my rifle, I felt exposed, vulnerable. The forest seemed to press in, breathing around me, and I had the unmistakable, gut-twisting sensation that I wasn't the top predator here. I didn't see a single deer that evening, but the woods were alive with the usual symphony of birds and small creatures. Squirrels scurried in the underbrush, and an owl hooted somewhere in the distance. Just as I started to convince myself that the feeling was all in my head, everything went silent. Like a switch had been flipped. The woods held their breath. No rustling leaves, no calls, no movement. Just a deep, crushing silence that made my pulse race. I knew enough to take that as a sign. Whatever had silenced the woods wasn't friendly. Dusk was coming fast, and I needed to get back to the cabin. My hands shook as I packed up my gear, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, every sense on high alert. As I started the hike back up the trail, the silence stretched on, pressing in around me, feeling almost alive. The trees seemed to close ranks, shadows deepening with every step I took. About 100 yards from the cabin, that creeping feeling intensified. Something was coming up behind me. I could feel it, the way you can feel a storm before it breaks. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and my heart thudded in my chest. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Whipping around, I raised my rifle, eyes wide and straining in the dim light. And that's when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the path, half shrouded in the deepening twilight, was a figure that made my stomach drop. It wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal I recognized either. It stood tall, bipedal, with a shape that was disturbingly wrong. The light was almost gone, but I could make out enough. Long, thin limbs, the grotesque shape of what almost looked like antlers crowning its head, and eyes that glinted in the last rays of dying sunlight. It resembled a deer, but twisted and upright, something that should never have existed in this world. We stood there, locked in some perverse staring contest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was frozen, clutching my rifle, but even with a loaded gun, I felt helpless. Whatever this thing was, I knew instinctively that a bullet might not be enough. My rational mind screamed that it wasn't real, that it had to be a trick of the light, but every primal instinct told me otherwise. Then slowly, it tilted its head to one side, as if studying me. That broke the spell. I stumbled backward, almost dropping my rifle, and turned to run. The forest felt alive around me, and I could almost feel the creature's gaze burning into my back as I sprinted for the cabin. Every step felt like a mile, and the shadows seemed to reach for me, trying to pull me down. I burst into the cabin, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were trembling so badly I could hardly hold my rifle. I didn't even bother trying to calm down. I threw my gear into my truck, heart hammering in my chest, and left that place as fast as my wheels could spin through the dirt. I never went back. The lease expired, and I didn't renew it. Some nights, when I'm lying awake in bed, I think about that hunting camp, about the way the door would swing open, even when it was locked, about the silence that swallowed the forest whole, and about that thing in the woods. Whatever it wasn't a deer. My friend and I were 17 and 16 back then, reckless and stupid, full of the kind of energy that keeps you up all night. We'd built a bonfire behind my barn, the flames leaping so high they lit up the surrounding fields and sent sparks into the dark sky. The fire crackled and roared, casting dancing shadows across the dirt and trees, illuminating the edge of the woods. We were joking around, making up dumb stories about creatures that might be lurking just out of sight. Skinwalkers, cryptids, anything that might give us a good thrill. My friend hated it when I talked about that stuff. He'd tense up, his eyes darting to the tree-line like he half expected something to come charging out of the darkness. That only made it funnier to me. I'd love to see something, I said, half to mess with him, and half because I meant it. For years, I'd fantasized about experiencing something unexplainable. The kind of thing that could make me believe in monsters or the paranormal, something that would finally give me a story to tell. I'd always promised myself I'd whip out my phone and get it on camera, proof for all the skeptics out there. My friend just shook his head, muttering that I was going to jinx us. As the fire crackled, we got the idea to walk down to my pond, about 500 feet away. Some of the water was illuminated by the firelight, and it seemed like a good excuse to stretch our legs and explore. We made our way down, still laughing and trading jokes about what we'd do if some humanoid creature actually came out of the woods. The whole area around the pond was familiar, a place I'd been to countless times. I'd even mowed it just hours earlier, so I knew every rock and tree stump. We were standing there, the firelight barely reaching us through the darkness, when something caught my friend's eye. He stopped mid-sentence, his laughter dying in his throat. "Hey," he said, pointing about 20 feet to our right. "Where'd that giant rock come from?" I turned, and the moment I saw it, every muscle in my body tensed. A A cold feeling swept over me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't a rock, and I knew it immediately. Nothing should have been there. I'd mowed this exact area earlier, and the only landmarks were two full-grown trees, standing like sentinels in the dark. But this thing, it was there, crouched low and still, glinting faintly in the firelight. "What the hell is that?" I whispered, taking a few cautious steps closer. My friend's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell is that?" he echoed, only now his voice was shaking. The thing was about 3 feet long, maybe 2 feet high. As I inched closer, it began to take shape in the shadows. My mind raced through every logical explanation, maybe a weirdly shaped tree stump, or a pile of rocks I'd forgotten about, but nothing made sense. My friend was starting to panic, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I was 5 feet from it now, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I leaned in, squinting, and then it hit me. This wasn't a rock or a stump. It was something crouched low, folded in on itself, almost in a fetal position. The skin was grayish, wrinkled, with thin, sparse white hairs sticking out in patches. I could see the shape of a neck and a torso, twisted in a way that didn't look right. My stomach dropped. My mouth went dry. "What is this thing?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Before I could process what I was seeing, my friend let out a strangled scream. Pure, unfiltered terror. He grabbed me by the arm and yanked me backward, his grip like iron. "We need to go. Now," he shouted, and that broke whatever trance I'd been in. We turned and bolted back up the hill, my legs moving so fast I barely felt the ground beneath me. The shadows from the bonfire danced around us as we ran, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting that thing to come loping out of the darkness after us. We burst into my house, breathless and wild-eyed. My mom looked up from the kitchen, unimpressed by our panic. "What's going on?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. We stumbled over our words, trying to explain, but she just gave us a half-smile, the kind parents give when they think you're being overly dramatic. "Oh yeah," she said, shaking her head. "Probably nothing," but it hadn't felt like nothing. It had felt like something was out there, something that had no business existing in the world I thought I knew. Determined to prove it to myself, or maybe disprove it, I grabbed a flashlight and told my friend to get in my car. We drove my old Civic down through the field, the headlights sweeping over the grass and trees. I held my breath as we approached the spot. The light fell on empty space. Nothing. No strange creature, no crouched figure. We searched the area, even drove into the woods, but it was as if whatever we had seen had simply evaporated into thin air. The next morning, we combed the area again, looking for tracks or any sign that something had been there. But there was nothing. The grass was undisturbed, the ground unmarred by footprints or claw marks. It was as if the whole thing had been a fevered dream, a shared hallucination. But it wasn't. We both saw it. To this day, my friend and I talk about that night, the thing crouched by the pond with its wrinkled, grayish skin, and the dread that had settled over us like a suffocating fog. I still wonder what it was, and I still kick myself for not taking out my phone to record it. But the truth is, when you're face to face with something that shouldn't exist, your mind goes blank. You don't think. You don't reach for your phone. You just run.